Welcome to the Love First podcast. Thank you for joining us. If you are returning, thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thank you for inviting your friends. If this is your first time, I want you to know that we're thankful that you've joined us. And the purpose of this podcast is to catalyze courageous conversations so that we can revolutionize the way we love one another. Over the past 2 weeks, we have been in an important discussion about disabilities and special needs and the intersectionality of justice, and especially in regard to the events that our nation is experiencing right now. We are going to continue that conversation this evening, so thank you so much for joining us.
Love first, I know. Lord, take control. Love first in my soul. Lord, take control.
I want to take a moment and welcome you to the Love First podcast. Thank you for joining us. My hope is that you have been engaging with us in these courageous conversations that are meant to revolutionize the way that we love each other. And you know on this podcast that one of the things we want to explore is the way that our society, our families, our schools, our government, our churches, and our communities interact with people who are the most vulnerable. And so a few weeks ago, we stepped into this important conversation about disabilities and special needs. You've had the opportunity to hear from Ryan Lee, a young activist with autism, and his fantastic video. And if you haven't heard that, it is available at lovefirst.org. And then you'll also be able to watch 3 videos of just families talking about their experience with disabilities and with family members who have disabilities. On those conversations, you'll also notice that we sprinkled in there some therapists and some people that have devoted their lives to serving families and individuals with disabilities. And these are open and honest conversations. And so if you are walking through life with a disability, or you have a family member with a disability, first of all, we want you to know that we see you, we hear you, we advocate for you. We also want you to know that these conversations are here to encourage and to uplift, as well as to let you know that there are people that are walking with you and understand the journey that you're on. And so today we have this wonderful opportunity to have a conversation with 2 of my friends, 2 people that are members of our church, Joe Ekstedt and Phil Woody. And I'm going to give them a moment to introduce themselves. We're going to start with Joe. She's going to tell you a little bit about herself and where she works and what she does. And she'll give you the elevator speech. Phil will give you his elevator speech on how he entered this world of disability. And then we'll continue in our conversation. So welcome, both of you. Thank you for joining us. And Joe, would you just let our listeners know who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Okay, my name is Joe Ekstedt, and I work with Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency, and the division I work with is vocational rehab. And I started out as a teacher and went into this field sometime later, got my master's, and then worked in the private sector for a few years, and then fell back into teaching and with special ed, and lots of different things. I decided to go into this field because I did like it. I like working with them. And my main objectives of my job is to actually working with people with disabilities and obtaining employment. That's what our agency does. It's employment-based. All of our services center around employment. My particular caseload is a collaboration with DBHDD, another state agency that we may address later. And my clients are seeking supported employment, and they either have an intellectual or developmental disabilities.
Wonderful.
So I collaborate with them and other people to provide those services.
Right. And so right now, you are working with a private agency that interfaces with a government agency.
Yes, a lot of mine are private agencies that we outsource our services to, you might say, and where those, some are private, some do get state funds, but most of them are private.
Like a nonprofit, is that a okay?
Some of them are nonprofit. Yes, some of them are nonprofit. Most of them are nonprofit. A few are not, but for the most part, most of them are.
Okay. Thank you, Joe, and thank you for your work and for joining us. And we're excited that you're on this conversation. And Phil, tell us a little bit about yourself and also what brought you into this conversation.
Sure, you bet. So, Don, I'm Philip Woody, and I am the father of Evan Woody, and my wife is Lisa Woody. I have a daughter, Emily. And my son, Evan, is 20 years old. And at a year and a half, he suffered a traumatic brain injury that left him disabled for the rest of his life. And we perform his average daily living skills, his ADLs, like bathing and shaving and dressing and toileting, just about anything that he needs, feeding him, making sure he's safe. And he goes to Dunwoody High School, and he'll be graduating next year. So what got me into this community and advocating for this community, of course, is because Evan had his accident, and we were exposed to all of the challenges that individuals with disabilities and families who care for those people face, whether it's medical, whether it's social, whether it's the services that we seek for them, or just how they're treated in the community, or how they're paid attention to or ignored.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into this.
That's beautiful. And Phil, you hinted at something that we want to make sure we touch on in this conversation, is that awareness can start for a myriad of reasons. It can come through, for instance, with Joe, a calling and training and that progressing, or it can come through any number of ways that a family can begin navigating disabilities, such as a child who maybe is born with some physical or emotional, mental, intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, but it can also come on because of accident or injury or illness. And so once someone begins to become aware, it's almost as if this world opens up. Something that you've helped me to recognize is we're talking about the largest minority in the world. In the United States, 61 million people living with disabilities, 26% of the population. Worldwide, over 1 billion. And so this conversation seems strange, that it would be everywhere and yet almost invisible. And so that's part of why we want to have this conversation, is awareness and advocacy. Joe, we know a little bit about where you're working now, right? But you mentioned that you had been in education. And we know from previous conversations that this gave you some very, very tough experiences. And sometimes it's hard for people to hear these experiences, but people who are living with and navigating disabilities are aware of some of the things that you encountered during your time in teaching. So can you share with us a little bit about some of the blessings and the hardships of that teaching profession that maybe propelled you to what you're doing now?
Yes, and there were more blessings than there were hardships, I will say. And a lot of the blessings, just watching my students, whether they were just learning disability or whatever, just watching them grow and progress, it was always a blessing. And when the light went off, you might say. And sometimes there were difficulties, because sometimes school systems might put you, these kids don't count as much. That's changed. That is changing. Sometimes that has happened. Sometimes they're, depending on what group you might work with, they can have some aggressive behaviors. I have encountered that before, and where I would get injured, and so, and that was some of my last experience, was working with that, getting frequently injured, and I just had to leave. I really liked the kids, and but that hands-on, that extensive hands-on was getting, especially at my age and other things like that, was just getting to be too much. And, so I kind of slowly fell back into this, and with the state agency. And so I'm working with a lot of them now. Most of them I won't see for several years, but some of them I might see later if I'm there long enough.
Yes.
I see later on.
Yes.
And so I enjoy working with this part, and helping the families navigate a lot of it. There's a lot of bureaucracy with it, unfortunately. And but just watching that, and that's how I did get a master's, as I said before, also in rehab counseling from Memphis State, University of Memphis now, I think. And so I did work in that field for a little while in the private sector. There were some changes in the field, but I wound up falling back into the teaching field and enjoyed it. But I just felt like it was time for me to move on to my other part that's still related to this.
So as we prepare to transition, Joe, you're going to talk to us a little bit about some of the myths around government behavioral health agencies, helping us understand a little bit about the difference between the way the nonprofits function and government agencies interface. And I think that's important, because as people begin to navigate these shifts and transitions, for instance, in Evan's case, it won't be long till the current way our system is set up, he'll be aging out of certain opportunities that are available to him up to a certain age. And so I would like for you to just take a few moments, if you could, and talk about these agencies and kind of the interconnectivity and how people, what are some of the difficulties they face navigating the interface of these agencies, but also some ways that people can maybe find a path forward.
I'll try to do the best I can, because mostly the one I'm going to be able to address is my own agency.
Yes.
And I can't, like with any state agency, whether it's mine or the one I interface with a lot or collaborate with a lot, DBHDD, Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, all of us have huge caseloads. There's a lot that needs to be done for each person. There's a lot, copious paperwork. There's a lot of steps people have to move through, and and I'm sure those steps are there for valid reasons, but sometimes it can become very cumbersome. And but a lot of myths is that maybe the people don't care, and I would say everybody that I work with do care, and but they may be working with 100, 200, 300 people. So sometimes it may come across that they don't care, even though they do. And so sometimes just being patient with whoever you're talking with and working with. And my particular part is I also work a lot with, I don't really work with them, but we do some stuff together with Social Security. And a lot of people think that if they go to work, they're going to lose all their benefits, and that's not necessarily true. There's SSI and SSDI. SSI is for those, would be more like Evan, that he would probably be getting, and they'll have to reapply for it when he gets to a certain age if he's not already. And that's not a whole lot of money, but it does help. And then there's SSDI and Social Security Disability Insurance. That's what you or I or any of us would get if we could no longer work and we'd paid into the system. And
you just said something I want to go back to. I don't want to lose your train of thought, but when you mentioned that someone you work with could have 100 families or 200 families. That's kind of a little overwhelming to the listener to think.
Yes.
Wow.
It's a lot.
Yes.
And it's a lot. And I want to do the best job I can for each person. And,
Yes.
but, and I think other agencies do as well. And that's the reason why they go into it.
Yeah.
And, because they want to. It's just like, I guess, child protection services, some of them, they get overwhelmed by caseload numbers. And there's the pay's not great, so there's not, you have to go to school for a long time and have your name and do all this kind of stuff and a lot of training, and you're not necessarily, so there's a lot of funding issues and other things like that.
Yeah. Hey, let's bring Phil into this conversation. Phil, you're obviously on another side of this conversation. My guess is you've encountered paperwork. I was watching you nod a little bit. What is it like for you as a parent to try over the last 18 years to come up to speed and figure out how to navigate this world?
So Don, first of all, I'll give all the credit, for the paperwork and all the administrative stuff that we have to go through to Lisa. She's just fantastic. First of all, I want to say we're just so blessed, and I'm so thankful that we're a two-parent family, and that Lisa has the time and the skills to be able to fill out all the paperwork that is required of a family to be able to get services from the state of Georgia or from the federal government, but primarily the state of Georgia. She has an accounting background, but that's not common. That is not common. What is very common is single-parent families who may be low income or mid-income, who have to spend all day long, working, and then they come home and they take care of their child. And that's, there's a that balance can change obviously from family to family. But she literally had to fill out every year paperwork that was this thick, if not thicker, in just hard copy paper that she would then. And a lot of times she would get like 1 week's notice or 2 weeks notice. This is all due. And she would just scurry to get that all together, then take it down to the, agency office that's asking for it and ask for a receipt. No, we can't give you a receipt. Really? Okay, fine. Here you go. And then you get calls. No, we lost your paperwork. Or, oh, it says here Evan is 18. No, at the time he was 8. And just so much of that goes on. And again, we just can't imagine what it's like for, a single parent family to have to go through all this. And so, we're different. We have a different makeup than a lot of families, but, all the credit goes to Lisa.
Well, and I think, why don't we take a moment and just circle that conversation a little bit, because what we're hearing, what I'm hearing is from Joe, I'm hearing that some of the reality on her hand, she's kind of peeling back the layer there, or maybe a better way to say that is she's kind of drawing the curtain back and saying, hey, behind here, you've got some people that are in it for the right reason. Their caseloads are, very large. The pay isn't great. They're, kind of doing their thing on that end. And then you're indicating that even in a two-parent home with someone with some unique background and training in accounting still finds this a very difficult thing to navigate. And one of the things I just have to say, Phil, that I so deeply appreciate about you and Lisa both is your complete awareness and empathy for families, single-parent homes, who are not able to navigate it this way. And I think that opens the door for us to at least allow our imaginations to rethink what advocacy involves. It's kind of a broad, range of concerns. That's some of what I'm hearing here.
Right. Absolutely. So first of all, I want to say that, I got into the advocacy because ever since I was young, I had a heart for politics as a way to help people. And I just can't sit back and do nothing, hoping that things will change. Voting is great. We all do it. Hopefully all do it once a year. But we're one in thousands who do that.
Yes.
But when you can change the minds of the people in the government who decide the budgets and the laws and who vote on the budgets and the laws, then you really can make a difference. And that's where advocacy comes in. We have to do all those things. But there are, a lot of different forms of advocacy, different places you can go to get involved in advocacy. You can do it as an individual, like I am, but I also, work closely with other people who are directors of other agencies, like Cheryl Arno, who is a director of the Georgia Down Syndrome Association, the Georgia Council for Developmentally Disabled, and so many more, the ARC. But so there are a lot of places you can go to get involved, but really what you have to do is, something as simple as just picking up the phone, calling your senator and legislator before there's an issue. Get to know them, get to be their friends, so that when issues like what's coming up now, the cuts for waivers to provide support for individuals like Evan and the 6,000 other who applied for it, so that when those issues come up, you can go to them and say, please, can you help us?
Yes.
So there are a lot of different ways you can do it, but
could you talk for a moment? I want to prepare our listeners for this part of the conversation. In a moment, I'm going to ask Joe to talk about ways that she, both as a professional and as a citizen, has grown into her advocacy over the years, because that's part of why she's on this call. But while she's going to lead us in that conversation in a moment, would you tell us about earlier this week, here in June 2020, when we're filming this, can you tell us a little bit about just this week and some ways that you and Lisa and Evan have been advocating just this week, so that our listeners can understand what is happening right now and how a call and an email to their senator, their representative, could make a difference, like right now?
Yeah, absolutely. When you talk about the things that we've done just this week, I think about what we've done over the years, from participating in disabled marches at the Capitol that, of course, never got any press. But anyway, this week, Lisa and Evan and I were granted 5 minutes of public comment to speak to one of the Senate subcommittees on appropriations that address things like, what's called the Now Comp waiver. The Now Comp waiver provides, respite care, residential care, therapies, just a whole myriad of services that families need. And so we were granted 5 minutes. How did we get that 5 minutes? Well, I did it by doing my research, going online and, who makes the decisions in the state? Well, it's the Appropriations Committee. Who votes on it? It's the senators and the legislators. What meetings do they have coming up? And I found they had a meeting this past Monday, and they were allowing 6 slots for public comment. So I'm like, it's probably already filled, but I'll give it a shot. I send the email, and what do you know? We got 5 minutes. And so there we are, sitting in front of 4 of the 6 committee members in the Appropriations Committee who have an influence, who we can. Here comes Evan.
Great.
And Evan's the star of the show. He's
Hey, Evan.
For the community.
How you doing, man?
And
good to see you.
So we went down there and we said our piece for 5 minutes, and it's things like that. Just trying to be creative in ways that you advocate, and just getting the message across, and putting the face of the issue in front of these people.
Yes.
And it's not just me, Philip Woody, with the professional with the tie. It's Evan and it's Lisa.
Yes.
And, it's the whole family, but more importantly, it's the whole community of the 6,000. I could go down there and try to get the services just for Evan and say, okay, I got him, I'm done. but no, there are a lot of people out there who need it, and a lot who have not even signed up because they don't know about it or know how to do it.
There you go. Okay, so Joe, let's hand off to you. Tell us ways that you have discovered through your professional life and your personal life, and as a citizen, as a follower of Christ, how have you learned to advocate?
And as a citizen, it's a little easier for me because I can say a lot more just as a private citizen.
Yes.
Lots of times, just helping people to be aware when people do have a disability, maybe sometimes maybe mocking people or other things like that, just sometimes confronting that part, and just helping people to be aware that this is something that can happen to any of us. It can happen to anybody in our family, like it did with Phil's family. And it touches all of us in some way. Yes. And then professionally, just helping sometimes the families. Most of mine is, helping the families, work through some of this. Because with my particular caseload, lots of times I'm working more as much with the caretakers or parents as I am the client. And helping them to find maybe resources, telling them what they are, and helping them to address that. But I think a lot of times it's been more me as a private citizen, letting people know, okay, this is coming up. This is what's going to happen. This is, some of the, like with these talking about these budget cuts, it's not going to affect my agency as directly as it's going to affect a lot of the service providers.
Yes.
And whether or not they're going to be able to stay in business or have they're going to have a reduction in force. They may stay in business, but they may not have be able to have the staff to be able to provide services.
Wow. So you've hit on two really powerful things here, Joe. I would like to lean into them a little bit, okay? One of the things that you addressed there was like this, just day to day, literally personally advocating in a moment where someone is being mocked or made fun of or pushed aside or mistreated. And I just think that's profound because the average person has encountered that. They've encountered that somewhere along the line, and they've been in that uncomfortable situation, and maybe they wanted to do something, didn't know what to do, but right there in the moment that people are able to do something. But the other thing you mentioned was this idea of leaning into the whole family, to helping the whole family. And Phil offered me some resources, some documentaries to watch. And one of the things I noticed in regard to employment is that a lot of times people had spent their entire life being told what they were not going to be able to do.
Yes. And that's, yes.
Then advocates begin to speak in, but what if we also emphasize what they are able to do? So could you talk a little bit about that with us?
Right. And like I said, my particular caseload is, now VR serves people with multiple disabilities. Be deaf, you could have, you could be blind, you could have a limb amputated, you could have spinal cord, all kinds of things, a mental illness. But with my particular caseload, is that what I do is, since it's supported employment and it's referrals from DBHDD, because we serve a lot of the same people, they have indicated they would like to probably pursue some type of employment. And with employment, there will be an agency and a person who will, from that agency, who will be working directly with that person to obtain a job, to research a job, to interview. Then on the job, they'll be with them. Lots of the times they'll be with them, depending on the person and the job and what they need. They'll be right there with them 100%. And then they'll start fading away as they learn that job. And they're not always going to be just working with that job seeker. They're going to also be working with the employer. Okay, if it was Evan needs these things. These are some things Evan needs. This is how you communicate with Evan. This is how you and the other. And helping them to understand what the job seeker or the person that's in the job, the employee, might not be able to do for themselves.
Yes.
Teach them self-advocacy skills as well, as best they can, that person can do. And there's different, I won't go into real detail about the different models of supported employment. But there's one model that I work with, and it's called customized. And that's usually going to be for somebody who has a more severe disability. And you're sitting there, what can this person do? And we go through an evaluation. Now, and it's not a paper pencil or anything like that, but it's learning more and more about that person, seeing what that person does on a day here, there, and other places, talking to different people.
Yes.
And, whoever is doing that, they look at what kinds of skills does this person have? And they know there's limitations or they wouldn't be with us.
Yes.
To know that. But this assessment is going to be looking at more strengths, what they can do, what kind of supports will they need to go to work, what would be their ideal conditions for employment. Then progressing from there and creating going out and saying, okay, I have some, looking at employees that might be able to use those skills and saying, hey, I see you need to do whatever it is. For example, now this is I have one that really she liked to shred paper, she liked to kind of tidy up, and it was with a small organization. And it was, and so what she does is she helps them shred all their papers, tidy up the place a little bit. She goes in 2 or 3 days a week, gets that taken care of. That's something that the employees don't have to do. They can, the other employees don't have to, because she is an employee. They don't have to take care of that. They're able to focus more of their time, doing other things. Because a lot of times this was taking maybe 30 minutes out of their day, just, things like that. And,
so we need creativity.
Right. And so it works. We want it to be something that's going to work, not just for our job seeker, but also for the employer.
Yes.
You want it to be
if an employer was interested, if someone's watching right now, and is either an employer or is in a decision-making exploratory role in a company, who could they contact to say, how do we learn about this? Could we find out if our company could participate in a program like that? Who would they reach out to, Joe?
I'm going to have to find out who that exact person is, but I would just say go to the website in Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency, and it may have some more information about who that particular person would be. And there's usually also tax incentives for employers as well. And they could, to take advantage of some of that too, as an incentive to hire somebody with a disability.
See, I think this is important because I remember when I was young, my father had a statement that means more to me now than it did then. And he said, things happen, and sometimes they happen to you.
Right.
And, the point he was trying to make was, this is going on all around you all the time, but because of your life experiences, you may or may not notice it. But you notice it when it happens to you. So I began thinking, one of the reasons I wanted to have this exact conversation is so that people could hear what you're sharing and begin to let their creative and innovative mind step into what if.
Right.
What if we did something, and how would we begin to navigate that? And so if you're listening and this has kind of touched you in the heart, piqued your interest, I want you to go to that website. Joe, could you give that one more time?
I think I'm going to have to go and see exactly how it's listed, but it's probably going to be gvs.ga.gov.
Yep.
I think I'm going to have to pull that up, make sure that's exact. I know that's how the end of my.
Well, we can put it in the chat box. And
Yeah,
people can
I
see
will.
it in the
I
chat.
will look for it, and I will make sure that that's exactly how it's listed.
Okay.
One thing that other people can just do, when it comes to my particular part of it, and lots of people are very just, they are so very overwhelmed. One of the biggest barriers I come up with, because sometimes people, their families are trying to work, they're trying to do this, they're trying to do so many other things, and they have an adult child that does want to go to work, and then run into transportation issues.
Mm.
And so just maybe if you know somebody that's doing that, or if you have a neighbor or other things like that, just be aware, maybe if that person is going to work, and maybe you're, retired, or maybe you work from home. So many people are working from home right now. You might be able to work it out that you could help provide some transportation.
There you go. There you go.
That's right. So that's something that some people might be able to do. And
This is very, very helpful.
right. That's just a big barrier for a lot of people.
And what I think you're both illustrating is that advocacy happens at multiple levels and through multiple avenues. And to Phil's point earlier, what we're looking for is really outcome. We're looking for things that actually do help people. Phil, I'd like for us to turn our conversation to a little bit of the intersectionality that we're talking about here in regard to families with disabilities. So I want to set up this, and then you can speak into this. When we think about the demographics of disabilities, you and Joe have both already articulated that this can happen to anyone. So disabilities happen in every culture, every ethnicity experiences disabilities. Your income will not exclude you from disabilities. It may impact your ability to get resources, but it will not shield you from potentially being touched by a personal disability or someone in your family having disabilities. We've also recognized that when it comes to disabilities, the problems that impact people with disabilities also have a tendency to spread out across the spectrum. One of the things that your wife, Lisa, shared with me this week, Phil, was early on, the two of you were told you'll need to get counseling because the families that end up not surviving intact after experiencing a disability like this is very high percentage, of far above 80%. And so there again, that doesn't have anything to do with someone's ethnicity or their income bracket or where they live. It impacts them differently. Another thing we wanted to share about intersectionality is at this specific time that we are doing these conversations, the United States is in an elevated conversation about police practices. And there are many, many opinions, and some of the opinions are being navigated, fairly well, and some of them are not. There's a lot of polarization on those opinions. But one of the things we're recognizing in intersectionality is that between 40 and 50% of police encounters with citizens is with people who are dealing with mental illness. And so I'm not sure that a lot of people are processing the challenges on all sides of that. But again, when we take a broad brushstroke and say something about policing, if we leave out of that conversation disabilities and mental illness, we are missing the mark on the solutions for this conversation. So when we start thinking about advocacy, we got to think about intersectionality and begin to ask, who can come alongside me and who can I come alongside to, as we solve one issue, we are actually contributing to the solving of other issues. And so what I'd like for you, if you would, to do is to maybe share a little bit about what makes you tired.
Tired with advocacy or tired with caregiving?
Say more about that.
Which one? Advocacy or caregiving?
Both.
Okay.
Both. I want you to speak
Oh,
into the personal experience, and I want you to speak into the advocacy experience.
All right. Hopefully I won't break down in the middle of this, Don. But
Hey, that's what these conversations
oh
are
my
for,
gosh.
right?
Yeah, where do you start? As a family, the one thing a couple things that are the most challenging are that, first of all, this is a 24/7 by 365 day a year job. Being a family caregiver of a person that you love so much who has a disability. As I mentioned earlier, we dress Evan, feed him, bathe him, shave him, toilet him, make sure he doesn't run out into the street. Lisa gets up with him at least 3 times a night. And, a lot of the families who care for these children and adult children have depression and anxiety as a result. And so they deal with that. One of the other things is that, we worry about how our children are going to be cared for after we pass away. No one is going to love our children any more than we do. And we just want to make sure that they're cared for, financially, emotionally, physically. We want quality of life for them for the rest of their life. And, one of my prayers is that there is someone who loves Evan, who protects him, and who cares for him till the last day of his life, until his last breath. And that's what we really care for. And the other thing is that it's financially draining because, when Evan gets out of high school, we're going to have to find something for him to do, to make good use of his time and to have a quality of life. And day programs can cost, $20,000 a year. And then when he eventually goes to a group home or we pass away and he has to go to assisted living, that could be as much as $60,000 a year in today's dollars. And when you total all that up over 60 years after he graduates high school, that could be as much as $2.8 million. And believe me, we're doing the best we can to save that, but that's a huge number. And I can't imagine what it's like for families who aren't, 2-income families and so on. So
yes. And you mentioned the other day, Phil, a number that struck me. You said that would be something like, in comparison, my wife and I,
right,
paying for, we have 5 children, paying for all of their education, college education, every year for the rest of their lives.
Exactly. And I'll just transition slightly over to advocacy. When you advocate and you go to your senators and representatives or really anybody who you want to try to influence for this cause, you need to put it in their terms, which is exactly what you just did, Don, which is, so how would you like to pay for your child's college education for the rest of their life? What impact would that have? So you hit the nail on the head, Don. Oh, hey, let me mention one other thing too, is that we couldn't do what we're doing today without support of a lot of people. Right now we're talking about services from the state, but you know what? We love our city of Dunwoody. We love our community. We love our neighborhood. We love our church. And if it wasn't for all of those groups, rallying around and us getting him out into those environments, I couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. I couldn't do it without my faith. Period. End of sentence.
Amen. It's been, I want our listeners to know that both of you have made such an impact on me. It's been my amazing blessing to know both of you over 20 years and watching you consistently live into, the best of this, but also with the stress of this has been incredibly moving. And so, Joe, I did notice that you just posted in the chat box the agency. Could you say it out loud for our listeners, so perhaps those who are blind or unable to see that would be able to hear it?
You want the website for my agency?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. It's https:// GVS.Georgia, spelled out, .gov.
Okay.
And there's other links in there that you can go to. It says employers, and I think I posted some information about that, and how actually hiring people with disabilities is actually good for business, and comes down to the bottom, dollar,
Yes.
and, with money as well. And it not only benefits people with disabilities, but it can benefit in businesses as well. And a lot of people even have a disability that you may not know about.
Yes.
And a lot of us may have a disability, and whether or not it may or may not result in functional limitations. And but a lot of people maybe live with a hidden disability too that does have some functional limitations to it.
Yes. And you touching on that spectrum is very, very important. The CDC has a lot of resources as well. And part of the resources that have been part of my educational process is what they refer to as invisible disabilities that people are living with. And they estimate, depending on how you classify them, between 70 and 90% of disabilities are invisible. Also, Phil, you mentioned a few agencies that have been good resources for you. Ryan Lee mentioned Autism Speaks and some other resources that were very helpful. So in our closing comments here, let's start with you, Joe. What do you wish everyone knew or would do next in regard to advocating for people with disabilities and serving this community well?
Right now, I think the immediate need is the budget cuts and contacting as many people, legislators and other things like that. That's a very immediate need. And just maybe, and then on a day-to-day, again, just helping them, families with disabilities and other things like this walk through this, because it is a struggle. And I do have lots of families that come to me, and it's one parent. They're, and that person may be trying to work as well. They've not been, whenever they were in school, a lot of things were taken care of during the day. Now they're home, and they can't be left alone. They're trying to work. They have to put food on the table, and they may not be able to work because of their, and then that puts them in even a more, dire situation economically. And, but so a lot of them just graduate from school to the couch, and nothing going on, nobody coming in. They're not going to any kind of program. Sometimes they lose skills that they gained in school because they're not, continually using those, using those skills and developing them further. And it just they get further and further back. And, so I don't know if I said very much about how to necessarily, but right now I think sometimes just walking through life with, and being there to see how you might not be able to do everything, but maybe there's one area you could help with, one area, and just one little thing that you might be able to do, and that might be helpful. You might not be able to do everything, but just one little thing. That's and just us as Christians and community.
That's beautiful, because as soon as you said that, I saw Phil nodding right along in sync with you. So Phil, I will pitch that same question to you. Okay. What do you wish everyone knew, and what do you wish they would do in regard to advocating for people with disabilities, families with family members with disabilities, and coming alongside and serving this community well?
Sure. And I'll try to make it quick because I could go on forever. But what I think it's important right now to know from a legislative standpoint is that the state budget has to be in place by July 1st. Okay. So there are 2 weeks left for the legislators to, work together to come up with a budget that the state's going to use for, for the next year, next fiscal year. And there have been massive cuts to two of the programs that the disabled community desperately need. And one is called the Now Comp Waiver, which helps with a lot of the services I talked about earlier. And the other is Family Support Services, which is the safety net for those people, those 6,000 people who are waiting for the waiver, to provide some support. Okay. And so that's the what. And the how is call your legislators, not just your local district legislators. That's incredibly important. But also reach out to the people who are making the decisions behind the closed doors. I like to say, like in the appropriations committee, and I can get those names for you.
Yes.
And when you call those people, if you're nervous and you want to go visit them, I'll go with you. That's what I do I talk to people on a day-to-day basis. But the other thing is show up as allies, with those special needs families when they go to the legislators. I can't go on all of them, but go with them and let them know that you as neurotypical individuals, allies, want your tax dollars to be used for this community that has been neglected and unseen for so many decades. Yes. Demonstrate with us, at some point. I would love to get to a little, protest or a march together. And the other thing I'm thinking about, and I would love to get, some of the men in our community to rally together to create an advocacy group that I'm thinking about calling the Men of 6,000, and a group of at least 600 men to start who would be involved in the lives of special needs persons and their families. Could be neighbors, fathers, allies, co-workers, and help these families, not just from a legislative standpoint, but on a day-to-day basis, like Joe just said, just show up. Offer to clean their house, offer to mow their lawn, offer to go shopping with them, offer to just go out, to a restaurant or to get a cup of coffee and sit and talk. Yes. And not just do it once, but do it on a regular basis. Yes. Because we want to be included. I mean, we're normal people. We're normal people with abnormal challenges. And and just keep in mind that, the disabled community is the largest unchurched community in the world. And, like I said, I couldn't do it without mine.
Yes.
I want to address if I can, real quick, something Phil said, because he wants to be included. Lots of times, depending on the disabilities, not only is the person with the disability isolated, but so many times their families are isolated. And this pandemic and shutdown and other things like that, that has further isolated people. And I think some people, it's gotten to their wits end. Yes. In some cases, because I know just even some of the children I have had, and I know the parents might have to deal with that continually, how hard it was for me at some times, and how hard it can be for them as well, and can be, overwhelming, just overwhelming.
Yes. Thank you for that, because we have, that's another area, Joe and Phil, of connectivity, right? Isolation negatively impacts people, period. Mm-hmm. And then you start compounding that, not just through the coronavirus COVID-19 experience, but then you compound it with the things that people are facing in their lives, special needs, and so on. And then we begin to see the human toll on people. And so I really deeply appreciate you leaning into that. You made me think of something. You remember when one of the first things that God, our Creator, said about humanity, it is not good for them to be alone. And I think that's just a fundamental statement about our humanness, is to be able to be included, and for that inclusion to mean whatever it takes, for our circumstance. Right. And Joe, to your point about employment, I really love that you emphasize that it's not just on preparing the person with disabilities to enter, but it's preparing the workplace to receive this person and to be supported. And so these are ways that this conversation is going to help us advocate. So a couple of things to wrap up for our wonderful Love First listeners is, number one, we would ask you to share this video, share this information, share this conversation. Next, we would ask you right now to contact those local legislators, those state legislators, engage yourself in this current advocacy concerning the budget right now. This is essential. And then let's begin to take steps. I love the way Joe said it. You can't do everything, but you can do something. So let's step into these opportunities to come alongside someone and just ask, what are some things that you would prioritize that I could be a part of? And so I want to say thank you to both of you. I want to say thank you to Joe. Thank you to Phil. I want to say thank you to Evan, because I can tell Evan's coming back into the frame. Thank you, Evan. And I want to say to all of our listeners, Evan did a great job advocating for Evan at the legislature. And we were very proud to be there and to see that and to watch that. God bless you, and thank you all for joining us on this conversation.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you
pleasure.
Take care. Okay. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Love first, I know. Love first.